Perhaps then I will then start if majority hears what I'm speaking here. So yes, I just wanted to start by saying that I'm I'm honored to be part of this seminar series, which I find very interesting, and I'm excited to be among such distinguished historians and digital humanists here, and I'm looking forward to your comments and also a discussion perhaps that we will have afterwards. So without further ado, I will share my screen. It used to work well when we tested this, and now I hope that you see my slides in the presentation mode now.
Yes, we see.
Okay, great. All right, so then I will start, and actually before that I will just put my timer on, because as it happens, when I get the opportunity to talk about things that interest me, I tend to talk a lot. So I try to limit myself a bit towards 1 hour. Okay, but I will start this presentation by telling you a little bit about my background as a digital humanist and digital historian. So my background is in cultural history, and I was trained as hardcore close reader, so I have been kind of like very interested in microhistory and things like that. And I did my PhD on Polish-Soviet foreign trade relations. So I have also expertise in basically in Soviet Russian and Polish history. And my PhD was about marketing of Polish fashion in the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 1960s. And when I was doing my PhD, it was still done using like what we call traditional historical methods, using archives and oral history interviews and such. And during my PhD studies, I started to be interested in digital humanities. And I had the possibility to spend a Fulbright year in Berkeley in 2014 and 2015, where there was this digital humanities lab, and I was attending many of their workshops and talks and learning a lot there. Then when I returned back to Finland, I was also attending these Heldig seminars and hackathon, as Harald's also has been doing this, and maybe some others here as well have been attending those hackathons. Then I was also I applied and I was selected as part of a cultural analytics long program that was organized at UCLA at the Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics. So it was already quite interdisciplinary 3 months session where I had the occasion to really dig very deeply into this multidisciplinary and digital research. Then at some point in 2020, I was lucky that I could enter to work at Tallinn University, where they established this cultural data analytics program, Kudan, where I have been working for 4 years. And this has been also a very important experience for me in terms of doing digital research. So I think that as my path as a cultural historian, coming from close reading and qualitative analysis, my curiosity has taken me to many different places. Usually when I went to some new places, I didn't really have a clue what's going on there, but then I got to learn something new. And I think that has been an important way of going forward during my my career. So I have been learning digital research methods since 2012, and I think that as a cultural historian, it is important for me to know some programming languages and of course understand the methods that I'm using. But I think that I can't stress enough the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration. So I think that the most interesting works that I have done lately are based on multidisciplinary collaboration, and I think that that's it is important kind of to acknowledge that for doing interesting research, we need this humanities expertise to be combined with technical and digital expertise in a good manner. So I think that's an important issue that I want to stress here. My research interest overall as a historian comprises of circulation of knowledges and formation of worldviews. And I have been studying these as a kind of like phenomena in many different settings. So, well, I have some images here of my past works. So together with Mats Fridlund and Petri Paju, we co-edited this Digital Histories book that was published by the Helsinki University Press. It is openly accessible, so if you are interested, you can download it from their website. Then I have been studying also different kinds of cultural and transnational exchanges. For example, together with Hannu Salmi and Bruce Johnson, we wrote this book about Yves Montagn's tour in the Soviet Union in mid-1950s and the cultural diplomacy and the mixed messages connected to that event. Then I have been very lucky to be part of some very interesting research projects that have taught me a lot. So one of the interesting research projects I was involved in was this Oceanic Exchanges project that was a transatlantic research project where we had colleagues from several European countries and also from the US and Mexico collaborating together and studying the global spread of 19th century news, and that was an interesting project, and we have some co-authored publications that came out of that project. In addition, I have been part of a project that was studying contemporary online spheres, and namely circulation of pseudo-historical narratives that are circulating both in the Finnish and in Russian online sphere. And in this research project, I was taking care of this Russian part, and we have also some publications that came out of that project as well. So these are kind of like the past works. Currently, I'm involved in the DINET project, which is it's a twinning project that is kind of like collaboration with universities in Tallinn, Turku, Amsterdam, and Bologna. And this project is dedicated to digital cultural heritage, and we are creating a prototype of twinned archives of prominent European semioticians, Juri Lotman and Umberto Eco, and we are also digitizing Juri Lotman's archives. And one of the goals of this project is to establish a digital cultural heritage hub at Tallinn University, where all other universities are supporting Tallinn in doing this. And in connection to this project, we have been organizing several workshops dedicated to different aspects of digital cultural heritage. And these workshops are also available online as video recordings. So if you happen to be interested in this topic, you can just go into our website and look at this and watch those videos. But here today, the main idea of my presentation here today is to focus on quantification and visual history. For the past couple of years, I have been extensively working with newsreels, and they are very interesting to me as long-term historical sources. So my primary sources at the moment are Russian Soviet newsreels, and I have also been working with Estonian newsreels, but I haven't published anything yet on that data. But these are the two main kind of like data sets that I'm using in my research at the moment. Some of you might be asking what newsreels were, and this is usually something that, especially if I'm giving a lecture to younger generations, people don't necessarily know what they were. So basically, newsreels were approximately 10-minute long news films that were shown in cinemas in the 20th century in a similar manner as today. As we go to cinema, we first see commercials and then the actual film. Back in the days, especially until the mid 20th century, in cinemas, people would see different kinds of shorter programs, and newsreels were among them. Newsreels were regularly produced from the 1910s until 1990s, or actually, if we look at the Western Europe and the US, newsreels were produced until the late 1960s or early 1970s. But in many state socialist countries and in some other countries as well, with the state support, newsreels were produced until the 1990s. And newsreels are a very interesting source of data because they are, as such, they are news, but at the same time, there is often very strong educational or propagandistic tone, obviously. But then there is also this one part of it is also entertainment. So the authors of the newsreels nevertheless wanted the people to be entertained because they were in cinema and so on. So there is a lot to study in newsreels. And I have the feeling that although I have been working with these materials for a couple of years now, I have only scratched the surface. So there is a lot more to do with these materials. This newsreel series that I have been mostly working with is this Novosti Dня, News of the Day, that was the main newsreel series in the Soviet Union. It was kind of like the Pravda of the newsreels, if you want to compare it to the newspapers. It was produced starting from 1944 until 1992, and it was produced by the Central Documentary Film Studios in Moscow. I have altogether approximately 1,700 newsreel issues at my disposal, and here you can see how, in certain ways, this is quite a kind of systematic, although there are holes in the data here as well. So my research interests. So as a cultural historian interested in circulation of knowledge and kind of like worldviews, my interest in newsreels comes with the understanding that newsreels are kind of like traces of past knowledge cultures. So I try to understand the past, how the cultural, technological, and information spreading activities, how can they actually be read through the newsreels. So unlike if I would be a film scholar who are, for instance, interested in the artistic manners and the films as forms of art, and films as materials themselves. But my approach as a cultural historian is to try to understand the phenomenon behind the newsreels, or through the traces left by left at the newsreels. And of course, as a historian, because newsreels are available in long-term, systematic kind of like continuities and as large scale. This forms an interesting continuities for me. But also it means that I need to use computational methods to try to analyze all these newsreels. So the interesting question to me is to how we can get to phenomena behind the historical audiovisual materials computationally, and where are the boundaries? What can we actually do, and where are the limitations? So if we talk about images and image cultures, and here I need to point out that although I'm interested in newsreels because of their multimodality, there is sound and different kinds of like spoken word and such. So far in my analysis, I have been mostly focusing on the visual parts. So we have extracted the central frames of each shot. So basically, I have been working on still frames taken from the newsreels. So this is again what I mean, that I feel that I have been only scratching the surface of these newsreels, is that so far I have been mostly working with the images. But here this reminder of my talk focuses namely on the kind of like the image side of the newsreels. So if we want to analyze images and think about the different disciplinary backgrounds, how they approach images in their studies, we can kind of like, of course, see this kind of like continuum of different kinds of approaches. And if we want to, in a way, exaggerate a bit, in one end of the continuum, there is this approach that I call humanities/social sciences approach. And here there is, of course, this emphasis on multiplicity of interpretations. So the way I read an image depends, of course, on my context and my experiences and my earlier kind of like background in a way. Then there is the production chain that is important to understand when we are analyzing images. And overall, in this approach, the kind of like understanding of culture as a construction is, of course, a very important component. Here, researchers from the humanities and social sciences approach use different types of marks or data points to analyze these data. They might be some kind of like focus on composition, camera angle, different roles of different people or symbols, these kinds of things that they are trying to identify in the images and analyze them. Then here it is assumed that there are many possible interpretive frames. So I can analyze the images from a feminist perspective or a psychoanalytical perspective or a semiotic perspective and so on and so forth. And all these provide interesting, new and relevant information about the image culture. This approach usually focuses on qualitative analysis, and there is this kind of like even tradition of thick analysis of images, the kind of like really going deep into the images, which of course provides very meaningful knowledge about the image culture, but it's hard to apply if you are working with a large amount of data. Then if we move on to the other end of this continuum, there is this approach that I call scientific technical approach. And this is an approach that is usually used, for instance, in the analysis of images in medicine or surveillance or car technology and so forth. And here, of course, the kind of like epistemological interest lays on one correct interpretation of the image. So there is no multiplicity of interpretations, but especially if we think about the application in medicine, there, of course, we are interested in whether we can see in the image a tumor, cancer tumor or not. So it's yes or no. Here, the marks or data points are usually pixels that then form certain objects that are in the focus. Usually this approach is done quantitatively, especially if we have large-scale surveillance data or card technology and so on. But sometimes there might be also kind of like small-scale data, for instance, that is used for analyzing different material layers on particular paintings or something like that. This scientific technical approach is usually systematic and applies machine learning, obviously. So between these two ends, there is, of course, something in the between, and that tries to combine the best parts of these extreme approaches. And this is the approach that I call computational image culture analysis. I don't know if this is the best title for this, but this is how I label this at the moment. So here, there are, of course, a lot of studies that have been done here in the between in using this computational image culture analysis approach. And here, usually, people are using recognition and detection of individuals and objects in images. They have been also using automated recognition of poses, gestures, facial expressions, and so on in the images. Here, people are using machine learning and multimodal large language models, and it's possible to use image similarity and kind of like compare image similarity through image embedding. And then people have been also able to detect some visual motifs lately with the help of large language models. Or it is even possible to detect some more abstract concepts such as love or family, at least to some more stereotypical ways. But this is still kind of like an ongoing process. How well do these multimodal large language models actually understand culture? But this is something that I will talk in more depth a bit later. So, but nevertheless, so I kind of like posit myself to this computational image culture analysis that tries to combine both these more qualitative and more quantitative approaches to understand culture in large scale as well, and visual culture in large scale. If we think about digital humanities in general, I think that, at least to my view, I think this is this can be debatable, and we can discuss this later if you want. But I think that if we think about digital humanities projects in general, they can be divided into two rough categories. One of the categories is that kind of like it takes a whole bunch of large-scale data and tries to identify certain categories and patterns within that large-scale data without any kind of like preset assumptions in a way. So this is, if we think about this kind of like textual analysis, that would be something to be done with the help of topic modeling, for instance. You just put there a lot of text, and then you try to see what kinds of categories you get out of that. The other kind of like rough category of DH projects that I see is that we already have some kind of like assumption that this is an interesting topic. I want to study this particular data to understand this phenomenon. And if we again compare to textual, natural language processing and text analysis, then I think that perhaps collocation analysis, where you look at specific words and their connections to other words. So here you have already chosen the target word that you are looking at. So Also here in the reminder of this talk, I will be touching upon both of these different approaches. The first one that I will talk about is that I called Soviet View, according to the paper that we have published. And here I'm going to look at how we have been harnessing a large set of newsreel data and trying to identify certain genres or types there and patterns emerging from that. Here, the approach of us that I kind of like try to label it as such that we first use this computer-assisted proto-annotation, so machine learning, and then we use human labeling, human labor to label those the topics that are emerging from there. And here we have been using image embedding that I will try to explain you more thoroughly, because I think that this is a very interesting method. And the next part of the talk that is here titled Quantification of Visual Leninism is kind of like a research project that is ongoing, where we have a specific interest that we are trying to identify in the data. And we have kind of like, we are applying this human categorization first, and then use computers to identify these categories. And here we use multimodal large language models. Okay, so again, I could not emphasize more that all of this work that I'm going to present you is something that I would not have been able to do on my own. So all these colleagues who are listed here have in one way or another been contributing to these or some of my other publications related to this. So I'm the person in this group who is constantly interested in newsreels, and then I'm asking the expertise of my colleagues to contribute these, and then we are producing these co-authored publications. Okay, but now I will move on to this part that I call the Soviet view. And here, as I told you, this is the approach where we did first this proto-annotation with machine learning, and then we used human labeling, namely my work, in labeling those categories that we saw there. And this is a publication or a project that has been already published in the Journal of Cultural Analytics, and it's openly accessible if you are interested in reading more about this. So the research question and the research interest of this project emerged from the interest in long-term visual discourses in the Soviet newsreels. So I was interested in understanding what kinds of kind of like long-term continuities and changes can we identify in the visual discourses of the Soviet newsreels after the Second World War. And here we used this multidimensional vector embedding of images first, and then we visualized them with different kinds of two-dimensional projections. So now I will focus on this this method of image embedding a little bit more. If you happen to be very well acquainted with this method, now it's the time for you to brew yourselves a cup of tea, and please let me talk about this. It will take approximately 10 minutes. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that, to me, these image embeddings were a new method a couple of years back. And I think that this is a very useful and interesting method. So if anybody is interested in in analyzing computationally and quantitatively images, I think this is a relevant approach to know about. So, what are the image embeddings? So, if I should put this in a very simple term, I would say that image embeddings are images turned into numerical vector representations. So we have an image, and using some computations, I turn that into a long number that can be then compared to other long numbers of other images. But now I will explain a bit more how we have been turning the images into numbers. So basically, if we think about many different types of images, and if we would be interested in comparing how similar or how different they are, it is of course quite difficult because there are all these different kinds of features in different images. However, there is an approach of kind of like maybe simplifying these images, but you can take these different layers of dimensions of images that can be compared even numerically. So if we think about, for instance, brightness of images, we can determine that some images are more brighter than others and put them into continuum. Then if we are interested in some other features, such as granularity, how detailed information or pixels there are in the image, or how kind of like flat in a way the images are. So here again we can, the more granular the image are in this figure, they are upper level of this image, and the less granular it's in the lower part here. Then we can add a third dimension. So let's imagine that we are interested in roundness of objects. Then we can add a third dimension here and put those objects that have kind of like distinguishable round objects on the fore, and push to the back those ones that don't have them. The problem here, of course, is that there are more than 3 dimensions in images that are meaningful. There can be colors, edges, lines, angles, robustness, shapes, whatever. And again, it is difficult to also to decide which of these dimensions are meaningful and which ones are not, if we are interested in image similarities, for instance. So for doing this, we need deep learning. So the idea of deep learning is that it turns images into vectors by using certain kinds of algorithms. So it basically goes through, here I refer to a machine or algorithm that goes through a large bunch of images or a large image collection, and decides which features or which layers, which features of the images are important as these different dimensions, as I showed to you. So basically, in a deep learning process, the algorithm goes through a large bunch of images and breaks the images into proto-features, basically a Lego cubicles. And then it goes through all the images and examines them in order to come up which features are repeated in the data. So if there are round objects quite often in the images, either a ball or a sun or something else, then it recognizes that, okay, so this round object is repeating, so that will be one of the features that we will kind of like try to detect in all of the images. Then it goes through all the images and matches images with the learned features, such as the round objects. To explain this in a little bit different manner. So the deep learning process goes with different layers. So let's imagine that we have an image, then we feed it into this algorithm, then it goes through this and many other images and identifies the colors, the edges, granularity. It shrinks the size, looks at the shapes, color compositions, different forms, and with all this, then it comes up with the vector representation of this particular image. And if we do this same kind of process, then run it to many different kinds of images, we can then compare what are the similarities, what are, for instance, the round objects are here, and the certain kinds of like color compositions are here. And the more similar numbers there are in the vectors, the more similar these images are. And if all the numbers are the same, it means that the image is actually the same. And that's how we can also detect similarity, kind of like exact copies of these images as well. There are, of course, many different deep learning models that can be used here. And there are, of course, benefits and drawbacks of image embedding. So the benefits are that image embeddings can be used to explore large visual collections with very scarce metadata. But on the other hand, these are black box methods. So not all the connections or clusters that emerge from here can be actually explained. And what, in addition, these very long numerical vectors are very hard for humans to analyze. So we first need to compress these multidimensional vectors that are very difficult to grasp for humans. And then we need a possibility to analyze them visually. So in order to be able to analyze these multidimensional vectors of images, we first need to reduce the dimensions. So we then use different kinds of algorithms to flatten the multidimensional space in order to be able to analyze and understand these multidimensional vectors in some ways. And this, of course, then makes it easier to analyze and visualize the data. There are, again, many different ways and many different algorithms for doing this dimensionality reduction, and there are pros and cons related to each of these. But to give you some examples, here are two different projections of dimensionality reduction algorithm called UMAP and the dimensionality reduction algorithm called TISNI. And I don't know if this is visible for you, but I can see that although these are dimensionality reduction algorithms done in the same set of data, so they contain the same images, they are organized in a little bit different ways in these different projections. So you can choose your favorite one in a way and to look at which one makes the most sense for you. There are, of course, benefits and drawbacks in dimensionality reduction. The benefits are that with this, by reducing the dimensionality, it is possible to uncover some hidden structures or relations without the need of kind of like heavy labeling of the data. And these can be useful for visualizations, noise removal, and so on. But then there are, like always in life, there are also drawbacks. The dimensionality reduction algorithms can produce misleading patterns or fail to capture some structure that is inherent in the data. And they can be sometimes difficult to interpret. So as a kind of like thing that I try to always remember is that reductions can be useful for the sake of research, but we need to always remember that they are simplifications. And now I will talk about the collection space navigator. So this is the tool that was developed by my colleagues at Tallinn University. It's an open source, an openly available tool that is developed particularly for analyzing embedded images with different kinds of projections. So these different kinds of ways of reducing the dimensionalities. So I have used this tool in my own analysis, and I find it very useful. And it's possible to import your own data there. And there are also some instructions on how to do this image embedding. And then you can also add your own favorite metadata data points there to ease the analysis and work on this. So there are some interesting demos here. And also some of the Soviet newsreel data is part of this demo, but they have also other very interesting data sets that you can check out here. Here is the how this collection space navigator kind of like looks like. You can filter there with different kinds of metadata data points that you have selected. In addition to that, we have also in another place what we call kinohroniku sample data. So here we have some sample data from Estonian newsreels, and if you are interested in testing and seeing if this could be somehow interesting to your own research, you can just go into this website and test it and see if it's interesting for you and how does it work. And here is how this kinohroniku data set looks like. But this is, this is the tool. And now I will very briefly, because I'm aware of the time that I'm using, I will tell you how we have been using these image embeddings to analyze these visual patterns in Soviet newsreels, and by using collection space navigator as well. So this is a UMAP projection of the Novosti Dnia newsreel series. And here we were, of course, first just very interested in looking at what kinds of image genres or types of images we could actually differentiate from this huge set of still images. And as you can see, there are in this, what I call like a continent of images, there are certain places where there are more images that are closer together, and then there are more sparser parts. So I was trying to look at these different forms and identify, based on these kind of like thicker parts of this continent, what kinds of like generic visual topics there are. So we came up with these seven visual topics at first. So the first one is like nature sceneries. The second one is surprise, surprise, political meetings in the Soviet newsreels. And then there is this, there are a lot of depictions of people mostly in political meetings again. Then there are, of course, close-ups of different kinds of people. The fifth category is industrial production. The sixth one is all different kinds of frames with text. And the last one is city sceneries. So this is what we detected by looking at this kind of like how these embedded images are being portrayed with this with this specific dimensionality reduction. Then as a historian, I was obviously interested in looking at temporal differences and temporal continuities here. So with the help of metadata entries, we divided these projections first into different kinds of temporal categories. So in the horizontal level, we can see that there are different years or year baskets. So the first one on the left are newsreels from 1945 to 1954. The second one is 1955, 1964, 1966 to 1984, and 1985 to 1992. As you can see, these are not even number of years, but they are based on what we saw in the images, and of course based on the Soviet political history. So that's kind of like how we divided this. The other way we divided is in vertical level. So in the upper row, we have all the frames that are from the first part of the newsreel. So the first like 3 minutes of the newsreels. Then in the middle row, we have the middle parts of the newsreels, and in the lower row, we have the kind of like the last 3 or 4 minutes of the newsreels. And this was important because it was obvious for us as we were watching those newsreels that there was some kind of like meaning in the order of the news items that were shown in the newsreels. So at first they would show some important events, some Soviet leaders meeting some important foreign dignitaries in Kremlin. Then in the middle part of the newsreels, they would talk about industrial production, agriculture, important features as well, but not as kind of like important as Kremlin. And then in the last part of the newsreels, they would have more entertaining topics such as sports. There was a lot of ice hockey, then some ballet, some consumer culture sometimes as well. So this is kind of like how we then categorized these projections based on time in years, but also in internal time of the newsreels. And with this, we got to see some quite interesting patterns here that I have highlighted in this picture. And I will just very briefly mention this one part here. So here, this was something that took part in the Khrushchev times and at the beginnings of the newsreel, so we can assume that it was somehow related to politics. And if we look at this more closely, we can see that there is this kind of like cluster of what I call dynamic leaders that emerged in the Khrushchev times. It was existent also afterwards, but not as prominently. So this is kind of like Khrushchev time specificity. And it's interesting to see how here the leaders are shown in a kind of like more dynamic positions because they are outdoors, they are often walking, and then there are these parades or rows of soldiers greeting the leaders and so on. So it was kind of like interesting to see interesting visual patterns emerging at certain point of time. Another interesting thing that we realized was that specifically in the perestroika time, there was a specific cluster of images that didn't exist before. The color images appeared at the same time, but that doesn't explain the whole phenomenon, why these particular images are clustered in this very particular way. And my hypothesis is that this is somehow related to overall a change of newsreel topics at the time, as they were not anymore only talking about how great everything is in the Soviet Union, but they started to talk about the ecological and economic problems, nationalities issues, and so on. And I think that the poses of the people were not anymore like heroic, but more of kind of like, when you're discussing problems, your pose is a little bit different. Well, but this is just my hypothesis right now, and this is something that I and my colleague are now going to look more in detail to see whether this actually holds, or whether there are some other kind of like explanations to this. Before I move on to the next part of my presentation, I just want to make these brief remarks that we in this project, we were able to detect both visual patterns that are already known or were already known by, brought up by other scholars, but we also detected some new visual patterns that, at least to my knowledge, have not been discussed by other scholars. So in a way, I was really satisfied, of course, that we, in a way, confirmed some of the already known knowledge, but we're able to discover something new as well. And with this, my kind of like thinking that in order to reach maybe a more complete understanding of cultural features, we need to combine both human qualitative interpretation, expert knowledge, and machine learning, or quantitative and qualitative approaches to really understand the phenomena. Okay, now I will move on to quantification of visual Leninism. I'm aware that I have been using quite a lot of time, and now I will try to shrink it a little bit so that we will have also some time for discussion. Okay, quantification of visual Leninism. And here, as a reminder, here is the type of approach where we already have chosen a certain topic, which in this case is Leninism, and then we use computers to identify the things that we are interested in. So as I have been watching quite extensively these Soviet newsreels, at some point I obviously realized that there is quite a lot of footage on Lenin. And I was, of course, then interested in kind of like, how is Leninism actually represented in the newsreels? And can we somehow quantify that? And I was also curious to learn, what can we actually learn about Leninism by quantifying? And is there something that remains unseen if we only count? So I'm trying to push here the boundaries of quantification in culture, and trying to see how far can we go, and if there are some limitations that where we then lose kind of like the understanding of culture here. As we all know, Leninism was a long-term political and cultural phenomenon that was disseminated and expressed in visual and textual terms, and it was a foundational principle of the Soviet state that had different emphasis at different times. There is, of course, a lot of scholarship on Leninism. Most of that is focused on text, but there is also some research on visual Leninism. And particularly, the preceding scholarship has been focusing on propaganda for children, particularly in the 1920s. And then, but as my interest is to look at the longue durée of the Soviet Union, the preceding scholarship is mostly fragmented, and it's focusing on particular decades, while this kind of like long-term approach is currently missing, and this is the kind of like the gap that we are trying to fill in here. In this particular study, we used, in addition to Novosti Dня, also Kino Nedelya, Kino Pravda, and Soyuz Kino Journal, to have also the pre-Second World War period here. And in this study, we also wanted to test different kinds of multimodal large language models in order to look at how can we actually use them for analyzing culture. And as we all know, computational methods are pretty good at detecting simple objects in images. But the problem comes when we try to identify cultural phenomena that are difficult even for humans to exactly determine. So for instance, myself, I can, if somebody shows me an image, I can more or less say whether I think that's a Leninist or not. But if I need to determine what are the features of the image that makes it Leninist, it opens much more, difficult problems and difficult questions to me. And then, of course, if we are trying to analyze and use large language models to detect visual cultural phenomena, so this kind of like we are trying to understand how far can we do this computationally and where are the limits overall for measuring and quantifying visual cultural phenomena. And then we are also testing the capabilities and limitations of large language models overall. So aims of this study are kind of like twofold. One of them is more methodological and one of them is related to cultural history. The methodological aims are to try to find a way to combine nuanced understanding of visual culture, of the humanities, large-scale analysis of computer vision, and readily available trained models provided by the large language models. And we're trying to propose a method for identifying, detecting, and quantifying visual cultural phenomena that allow also us to explicate the visual phenomena that we are looking for. And also we're trying to limit the hallucination potential of the large language models. And of course, the historical part of this aim of this study is to try to understand the temporal patterns of visual Leninism in the Soviet newsreels. So as you can hear, there are two parts in this study, and it's actually we are now dividing them into two different papers. The method paper that we are working on aims to test the capabilities of pre-trained multimodal large language models, and we are trying to propose a pipeline for detecting visual representations of visual cultural phenomena. And the case study that we are using here is the history paper, where we are analyzing the volumes, types, and temporal variation of visual Leninism in newsreels. And then we kind of like evaluate the picture gained in this way to the preceding scholarship to try to see where are the limitations of this method that we are proposing here. So there are, again, of course, some problems, as I already hinted, and the most important ones are related to definition and hallucination. So first about the definition. So first of all, it is quite difficult to really determine whether an image is Leninist or not. Of course, we can say that if it's a newsreel and then there is this Lenin's head, it seems to be quite Leninist. But simultaneously, not all images of Lenin are necessarily Leninist. So for instance, Lenin has been portrayed in Stalinist pictures, and then going totally outside of this kind of like Leninist sphere. For instance, in the 1980s Poland, there was this alternative artistic group, Pomarańczowa Alternatywa, that was also using Lenin's image for its own purposes, and then also contemporary uses of Lenin's figures, such as Cyber Leninka in the library in Russia. But then, if not all images of Lenin are Leninist, there can be also almost anything can be a Leninist image. For instance, in the 1920s, this huge queue people queuing to see Lenin's body or the bench where everybody knew that Lenin used to sit are Leninist images, but you only need to know that. And the contextual information is obviously very important here. So we are not able to determine 100% all the features of Leninism, but we can try to reach towards that. The other problem is hallucination, but I will now skip this part to be able to talk a little bit more about the method here. So for this analysis process, so this is the preliminary version of the analysis process or the pipeline that we are suggesting here. And I think that what is the most important part is this, what I call operationalization of the phenomenon. And with that, I mean this kind of like what I call like translation process of an idea of some cultural phenomenon into some data points. Because in order to study something computationally, the thing needs to be converted into data points that we can identify and measure. But this, in order to be able to do that, we obviously need an explicit definition of the phenomenon in the study. And this is a kind of like a process, a thought process that involves matching the research question, the preceding literature, and the used data. And with this process and thinking a lot, then you come up with the features that you want to identify as Leninist. In our study, we have been now doing this, and we have divided these data points that we are using in order to identify Leninism into two categories. One of them is the first that we are trying to identify the images that we categorize as Leninist images. And here we use the questions of whether there is Lenin, whether there is Lenin's mausoleum, or whether there is a text referring to Lenin in the image. Then for those images that we have already categorized as Leninist, then we are interested in how Leninism is portrayed in the image, what kind of Leninism there is. And for analyzing this, we use then some additional questions, for instance, related to whether Lenin is alive in the image. Does the image portray the corpse of dead Lenin? Is Lenin as a painting, statue, or other artistic interpretation? Are there other Soviet leaders in the image? Are there children? Are there flowers? And so on and so forth. So we use quite extensive prompts where there is only yes or no answer as a possibility. And then here, it is of course important to use validation of the results by using both training and testing examples to make sure that the results of this analysis done by large language models is somehow accurate. And here are some of the preliminary results. These are very preliminary results related to the numbers and percentages of Leninist images. I actually think that these numbers will be smaller, but we will see as we will run again these queries. And for the types of visual Leninism, we are with these distinctive questions of the type of Leninism, we can then try to cluster these different types of Leninist images in the newsreels. And if we have these typologies, then we are able to count how many frames per each year they were of this particular category and see what kinds of temporal differences there were along the years. To run very quickly through these different the preliminary analysis of the typologies of visual Leninism. One of the typologies that we have been identifying is this Lenin and the Soviet leaders. These are from the early years, then from the kind of like 1950s, then again 50s. The second category is Lenin as a philosopher and teacher. Here, Lenin is giving a speech, and then there are some kind of like books loaded in the agitation trains. Lenin emerging in library, and then Lenin in the kind of like context of teaching. Then there is Leninism as good quality work and construction of the society. Here again, like from early years, then more in this industrial context, in the context of building new houses in the 1970s. And then there is this Lenin, the grandfather, for, or father or grandfather of the children. Here we have, of course, Stalin as well in the early 1950s. And then we have Lenin in the Soviet Russian history, portrayed there as a kind of like in the continuum of the history in different years. And then there is Lenin, the defender. So this is kind of like a little bit aggressive Lenin defending the communist cause against imperialism and so on. So this is, of course, this is an ongoing project, and we still have a lot of kind of like further questions that I have in my mind. The most pressing question that I have is that when we are finally able to quantify and calculate how many Leninist images there were, what does it then actually mean? What does the amount of Leninist images tell to us? So if we have, for instance, if we identify a peak in Leninist images for a certain year, does it actually mean that Leninism was somehow increased in the society? Or can it actually mean that the authors of the newsreels were worried that people are not interested in Lenin anymore? So maybe we should pump up and put more Leninist images there. Maybe people get interested in, or maybe there are some other reasons for that. So this is, of course, a question related to quantification. And then again, as a cultural historian, I'm not sure whether it's possible to quantify visual cultural phenomena after all. Maybe we can do that to a certain extent, but perhaps something remains unseen if we look at it this way. And what remains unseen if we are trying to quantify visual cultural phenomena? And how far is it possible to reach for genuinely new knowledge about culture and the past with long-term data and quantitative methods? I think my hunch is that it is possible to reach some new knowledge, but we need to be also very precise and also critical about the data points and the analysis methods and what we are actually measuring, and what is the kind of like the connection between what we are measuring with the actual phenomenon that we are interested in. So to conclude my lengthy talk, I just want to highlight a couple of things here. So I think that these projects that I have presented here now are the first steps towards incorporating quantitative computational approaches to qualitative analysis. But I see that these are only kind of like the first steps, and we need more experts, particularly in culture and history, to explore the opportunities and limitations critically. So I see that there is so much work to be done, and I want to encourage you all to join me to do this. And as a person coming from kind of, I feel like from Eastern Europe, from Finland, and from the kind of like Nordic countries, I think that until very recently, and perhaps even still now, there is very heavy emphasis on Western European data in the field of digital humanities. And I think that this is something that needs to be diversified, and we need to have some additional studies, additional emphasis to make this kind of like the whole digital humanities more complete and more kind of like, to have more voices there. And again, as I said, I can't emphasize the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration more because this is something that I personally have experienced as the best way to be able to do interesting research that has good quality, and both from the perspective from the humanities perspective, but also computationally valid in a sense. That was everything that I wanted to say, and I say paldies. Thank you.
Paldies, Mila, thank you. You have immersed us really deep into visual stuff and really fascinating topics. I think everybody loves Lenin and Leninism. Also, thank you for explaining some computational things to me. Now I almost feel like I understand it. So before I give a floor to questions to colleagues, I have one small question from my part. During preparation stage, we were discussing that you might show some tool. So is this collection navigator space the tool you were thinking about? And is this the one you could recommend for people with no previous knowledge or little knowledge, that's something they could use?
Yes, so this is exactly the tool, the collection space navigator. I can put it on the chat. So let me just copy and add them here. So here in the chat, so this is the link to the GitHub page of the whole tool, where you can find the code and everything. And then I put here the link to this kinohroniku dataset. So basically, how to say? So in order to use your own data with the collection space navigator, it of course then depends on how comfortable you are with computations. I have been doing this in collaboration with my colleague, particularly Tilman Ohm, who set the tool for myself. Although there are quite clear instructions in the GitHub page, so that you can use it and install your own data there. But there are these test data sets both in the GitHub page and this kinohroniku. So I would recommend maybe first test them, and if you have some questions, you can email me or my colleagues and ask. And then if you think that this would be useful for your own data, then you can of course use it yourself, or ask somebody else's help if you are not very comfortable with the computational part. Yeah.
Thank you. So do we have some questions?
I see that there is one question in the chat, at least. So should I take that
yes,
question
let's take
first?
that.
Yes. Okay. So there is Vesma Levalde is asking, I'm confused by how you use the term Leninism, which seems to refer to Lenin's image. My generation tends to use the term to refer to Lenin's philosophical and ideological works as a whole. Is there perhaps a conceptual connection here that I have failed to grasp? Oh, yes. So so this is a very good question, and yeah. So and I now see that I didn't maybe explain my my approach well enough. So my interest is particularly this kind of like more philosophical connection of Lenin or Leninism. But I'm in my research in this particular study, I'm interested in how this philosophical Leninism was visualized in the newsreels. So that's why we are. I'm not only interested in counting how many times Lenin is shown in the images, but also the connections, because I see that there is a lot of kind of like Lenin as a teacher or Lenin as kind of like philosopher or Lenin as a defender. So all these kinds of roles, but simultaneously I'm obviously aware of that this particular interpretation of and the way that I have operationalized visual Leninism here is not the only one. So, and I know that there are different ways. For instance, some art historians in Estonia have been also analyzing kind of Lenin's and Stalin's portraits in kind of like Soviet art, and they have emphasized some other kind of like maybe some emotional characteristics related to Leninism. So there are these, again, different ways of categorizing the visual Leninism, and my way of doing that is of course not the only one, although this is kind of like maybe my attempt to reach towards this like philosophical understanding of Leninism. So I hope that I'm responding to this very important question well enough.
So we have another question. People, if you can speak, it's nicer if you could turn up the camera and just ask the question, unless you have some problems with mic or camera. Yanis, are you with us? Okay, Mila, maybe. Oh, Yanis, you can?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And my question is, how do you get these still images from the frames? Was it a manual process or automated? Thank you.
So thank you so much for the question. And this is again something that I didn't explain well enough. So thank you so much for asking this question. So there is, so we did that computationally. So there is a widely used Python package for extracting the still frames or the shots from audiovisual materials. And so we identified all of them. So we extracted all the frames. So basically it's like 25 frames per second. But then in order to a little bit limit this data set, because of course it's a huge amount of data, so we then run this shot detection algorithm that helped us to determine each shot of the film, and then we took the central frame of each shot, and this is so we are operating with the central frames of each shot as a kind of like proxy for visualizing each of these of the shots. So that's our approach, and this of course comes again with pros and cons. Our evaluation is that that with this approach we get basically all the major if there are major changes in the film, we get to see each of those kind of like characteristical frame the newsreel. But there are, of course, some possibilities for gaps because we are not using each and every frame of the newsreels. Yeah, I hope this explains a bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Mila.
Thank you.
Eva, please.
Hello, Mila. Thank you for the super interesting lecture. My question is about more general about how a humanities researcher can benefit from all the technological process of research. I started to think about that when you explained about this reduction of image dimensions and that there are different algorithms, they kind of give slightly or more different images and so on. And it's all very technical and process, and also choosing from so many options of what to use, what not to use. And I wanted to ask for your reflection of if all this process, this more technological process, if it gave some new discoveries for you as a humanities researcher, and how do you see it, this process from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh, this is very interesting. In relation to in order to be able to choose which algorithm is the best, so this is exactly the reason why I emphasize the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration, because although I'm able to use one algorithm, my expertise obviously does not, I'm not able to say which algorithm is the best for this particular method today, and maybe tomorrow there will be another algorithm. So I have kind of like general understanding of this, but that's why I need my colleagues and their expertise, particularly in these technical questions. But as a humanities scholar, I think that being part of this kind of like computational processes has actually provided some like very deep or deeper thinking in many different ways. For instance, one of the things is related to this what I call this operationalization. So I'm trying to define the cultural phenomenon that we are studying and turn it into the language of the computer. So if I see that this image is, Leninist, how do I explain it to a computer, and how do I do this kind of like translation process between humanities and computers? So that's where I think that humanities scholars are needed. And I think that finding the correct ways to this transmission and to select the right, the best data points that reflect the phenomenon that we are interested in, it is at the very core, and it is that we need humanities scholars. Another interesting point or place where I have found like using these computational methods very useful is actually in those moments when we, for instance, we need to polish some data, or I need to go through some check whether the shot detection algorithm has actually detected the shots in correct way, or we have been also detecting, or in another study, we have been looking at which cities are mentioned in the Soviet newsreels. And as I have been going through manually some of these data and correcting it, it has actually given me a better insight. And it kind of like, it has been qualitatively very important process for me, as although it's from the perspective of my computational colleagues, this is kind of like something that is not very interesting, and it just needs to be done. But this I find very useful for my my historical thinking here. So yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mila.
Thank you.
Okay, so I can again ask a question. So at some point you mentioned you're interested in knowledge and knowledge circulation, knowledge formulation. And I was thinking about this part where we are using machine learning to cluster some images. So, and it might, the result might show us that some of our suggestions were right, and in some cases that we are wrong. But I think what's even more interesting that sometimes it shows that at something we didn't even think about it, right? And what do you do at that situation? Are you happy to accept it because it's a true knowledge that in the data, or are you feeling very that now machines and AI are kind of doing the conceptual analyzing instead of you? I think it's an interesting direction. We are often not asking this kind of question because we're just happy to see something found. But if we could not see it with our prior methods, I'm unsure where we are in this area of knowledge production.
Yeah, I think you are touching upon very, very crucial questions here. And I feel that when I'm using computational methods, I'm in a way just putting on some, additional glasses that to see the data in a way from a different angle. And it doesn't necessarily, the results that I get from it, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. And there is just kind of like, it's just machine doing something that is irrelevant for human knowledge. But sometimes it provides some interesting questions, and to dig deeper in order to understand whether the kind of like the new way the data represents itself through machine can be very interesting. For instance, this example of this perestroika type of this cluster of images, where I'm still not sure whether this is just, it might be that these images from the perestroika time are clustered together because there is some watermark that is completely irrelevant and only the machine sees it, but I can't see it. So it is possible that it's irrelevant from my perspective, but simultaneously, it is also it is interesting to try to see whether there is something that I could grasp as kind of like meaningful and important knowledge. So I actually, when I get some results that are somehow unexpected, so of course I find it super interesting, but sometimes then there are moments when I then realize that okay, so this is, it doesn't, it's, the result is because of this or that. But of course with machine learning, the problem is, like I said, that they are black box models often. So in order to really know what is the reason behind this particular cluster, can be sometimes hard to detect. But at the same time, I think that I really like to play around with kind of like my own reading, with my own interpretation, and using this computational approach. And as a historian, I have started to think that in history, for us, kind of like contextualization is super important, and we usually do it by referring to the kind of like other research literature, which of course is important. But I have started to think that actually, as a historian, I need also contextualization by data. So I have this whole data, and then I might find an interesting pattern there. And then, even if I would be analyzing qualitatively a certain smaller pattern emerging from there, it is important information for me to know whether this is a kind of like a generic pattern that it existed everywhere and always, and that's why it is important to analyze qualitatively this particular thing, or whether it's something like an anomaly and something that is completely different from all the others, and I'm interested in analyzing that because of that. So, with the help of quantification, I think it is interesting to have this, contextualization as a historian as well.
Thank you for a rich answer. That's why we love research. I think we
Yes.
could talk for minutes
Exactly.
and hours about this. Nobody is asking this question, but I think I would ask it. So you started as a historian, and you mentioned traditional methods, and then at some point you did this transition and you started using also digital methods. So what would you advise for people in humanities, for historians who feel that they are in the traditional part, but they would like to do some digital things? Because it's not so easy to find those multidisciplinary teams where you can just easily recruit technicians who will run everything. I think it's important to be able to do something yourself. So what would be the first steps you would advise to take?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this is actually getting to know people and colleagues from other disciplines wasn't easy at first. So I acknowledge this, and I think that this is something that we in the digital humanities field in general should kind of like facilitate even more, these kind of like interdisciplinary encounters and such. But as a kind of like starting, as a person studying in the digital humanities, maybe my first advice would be that nobody is actually kind of like a complete expert, super knowledgeable in a way, because I think that the essence of digital humanities is that it's a constant Google search. So there is always something that you don't know. So sometimes I encounter like super knowledgeable colleagues who are somehow apologetic about that. Yeah, I don't know so many methods, but nobody knows so many. So just kind of like, don't be afraid. That's my first thought here, because I think that we definitely need more humanities and kind of like critical approaches with these computations, and particularly with large language models, which are super, nobody understands them completely. And that's the problem with the world in general. But I think that starting from this, and then of course, the best way is to start either using some tools and testing, and then nowadays there are also very good tutorials related to certain programming languages and so on. So I started, for instance, there is this programming historian. I think that many of you are aware of that. So I started with that. So I had there was this topic modeling tutorial that I just first made it, step by step. I remember at first I didn't understand any of the sentences, and I really needed to read it many times in order to understand. But then I managed to do the tutorial, and then I applied it to my small data set, and I was like super happy because I got some interesting results out of that. So I think that doing hands-on and first maybe you doing those tutorials with the kind of like the method that could be interesting to you, and then testing it to your own interesting data. I think that's the way to start.
Thank you. I think it's really encouraging that you also say that at some point you didn't understand what you were doing.
No.
I found it really encouraging for me to see how other people around are struggling in my way in digital humanities.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you a lot. If there are no questions, there is a last moment if somebody wants to ask. We are already past time. Then Mila, thank you again. I feel that we strongly want to see you again, maybe in summer school or at some other workshop.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I'm like I said, I'm honored to be here, and I'm also interested actually in Latvian newsreels, because I'm crazy about newsreels, as you can see. So, that would be lovely, to continue collaborations also in other terms, not only in terms of Leninism, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
everybody for attending. Let's meet in some other workshop or seminar. Eva, maybe you have something to add? No? Okay, then. Bye.